Hello, welcome to the Leukopak Lady. Today I'm doing something a little different. I'm interviewing Tracy Ryan. Tracy is the co-founder and chief communications officer at NKore BioTherapeutics. She has a background in marketing and communications, and I can't wait to dig into the work that she's doing in the biotherapy space. So hello, Tracy. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me today, Jenny. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Great. So tell me a little bit about what NKore BioTherapeutics does and what your goals are.
So NKore BioTherapeutics is backed by 35 years of research out of UCLA. We have what's called a supercharged natural killer cell therapeutic, NK101. And this is an allogeneic NK cell therapy where we find super donors, we harvest their NK cells, and then we supercharge them through a proprietary supercharging process that was part of Dr. Anahid Jewett's development strategy. I came in to license the technology around 2018 after I was looking for a cure for my own daughter's low-grade brain tumor that had been relentless. We're now currently treating patients through medical tourism in Cancun, Mexico. We're about to treat patient number 8 in December. We've given 20 infusions, and my daughter was patient number 2. And we're seeing incredible results with no side effects thus far. So we're now in a position to set that first meeting with the FDA, hopefully in the next several weeks, with the final package being delivered hopefully the beginning of next year, so we can look towards starting those larger scale human trials in the United States into 2026, beginning of 2027 sometime.
Sounds very cool. So you are a co-founder of NKore, and it sounds like your daughter had something to do with your motivation to get involved with this company. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yes, absolutely. She is the whole reason I do everything that I do every day of my life, honestly. Yeah. My daughter's 13 now. Her name is Sophie. And at 8.5 months old, she was diagnosed with a low-grade brain tumor called an optic pathway glioma. These are traditionally survivable tumors with a 90 to 95% success rate, but they do have an 85% recurrence rate. So our young infant, being as little as she was when she was diagnosed, sadly, this tumor was quite relentless and quite aggressive for slow-growing tumor. She did 7 years of chemotherapy, 8 protocols failed. She had 6 brain surgeries, 12 surgeries on her body in total. She's legally blind with a left-hand side weakness. From the very beginning, we found out that there was little research that was being done for pediatrics in general. For our daughter, next to nothing, because this was a survivable tumor. They weren't even studying this tumor at St. Jude's. So when I found out that pediatric cancer had barely been involved in 40 years, that is when I knew right away I had to take action. I couldn't believe what I was learning, and that only 3.8% of all government funding was actually going to pediatric cancer research. So without the funding, the big companies don't have the money that they need in order to even research children, because there's no way for them to have a return on their investment since it's so expensive to take these drugs to market and the pediatric population is so small. So that's when I went on my global hunt around the world to try and find someone that could help with Sophie. Medical cannabis was our first touch point. There was a woman named Ricki Lake, who's former talk show host and celebrity. She's been in many iconic movies. She's a documentarian, and she was filming a documentary at the time that she had just begun called Weed the People that was on Netflix for 5 years. It's now on Apple TV, Amazon Prime, and Gaia. I think the 3 places you can buy it. And she had been looking into how cannabis can work in cancer. And this is a plant that had been studied around the world for decades and decades and decades, but had been criminalized. And we'd been fed a lot of disinformation essentially about cannabis that originally went back to the 1940s to Harry Anslinger and William Randolph Hearst, and it was about political power and money, essentially. So because this plant was demonized, it was taken out of the medical system. It was no longer being given to patients and was made to be a Schedule I narcotic, which meant it had no medical benefit. And it was highly addictive, even though the government has a patent on it as a neuroprotectant, meaning it has medical benefit. So for anybody that's familiar with cannabis out there, if you can imagine being told or telling the world that this is more dangerous for you than cocaine, is kind of a far stretch of the imagination for anyone who has any kind of experience. So when I started learning about this plant and I took it to my daughter's oncologist, they actually did the research on their own. And again, this was in like 2013, before cannabis was even talked about for seizures in children, much less for any type of medical treatment in modern medicine. But they did the research and they came back to us and they said, we don't see any reason why you shouldn't use this plant if you have people that know how to guide you in care. And we did. And we were guided in how to use the plant very safely and softly, meaning our child wasn't highly psychoactive because we started at extraordinarily tiny doses, and then slowly over time increased the dose as the body grew a tolerance to the psychoactivity. And with children, they have immature endocannabinoid systems. And the endocannabinoid system is a system that runs throughout the whole body. It's the actually one of the largest networks in the entire body that helps regulate homeostasis, or helps to keep the body in a perfect balance, which again is something at the time that wasn't even being studied in med schools because of this demonization of the plant. So I ended up literally traveling all over the world, working with scientists in Israel, trying to see if because they can study cannabis legally there, trying to see if there is something that we could use for Sophie that could stop this tumor more effectively. Because although we saw a lot of tumor death that we never expected to see in the first 13 months of her treatment, because these tumors don't normally shrink that often with chemotherapy, we saw like an 85% reduction in 85 to 90% reduction in the first 13 months of her treatment. The tumor ended up coming back. And it just became this cycle of wash, rinse, and repeat with chemotherapies. So it was because, I would say, of the positive benefits that we were seeing in Sophie that we really stayed the course with this plant. Her immune system wasn't dipping like the other kids that were getting hit with these heavy chemotherapies. She was the only child in the entire clinic that didn't have to come back after 4 weeks of chemotherapy for that 5th week to make sure her counts were recovering, because her counts weren't getting into a dangerous zone, which was not common at all with any of the other children. We also saw when she was having seizures, seizure mitigation. If you took Sophie off of her cannabis, she'd have 10 seizures a day using Keppra alone. If you kept her on the cannabis, she'd have 1 seizure every 3 to 6 months, and it was so tiny that if you weren't her parent, you wouldn't even know it was a seizure. It's called a stop and stare seizure. But what was even more fascinating is when she had brain surgeries. There was this one brain surgery that she came out of that was an 8-hour surgery where she didn't have any bruising or swelling on her face at all. And the doctors walked in and they looked like they'd seen a ghost. They could not explain why our daughter was smiling. She was cheery and her face looked stunning, except for this massive scar from here to here. It was actually an incision at the time because it was only 24 hours later. And they were like, whatever you're doing, keep doing it, because this little girl looks amazing. So there was really something significant going on with her immune system. That's what led to our creation of a company called CannaKids, which was a tincture line where we worked with thousands of patients all over the world. I was doing 60 to 70 speaking engagements a year globally, talking about medical cannabis, advocating for this plant. And that is what ended up leading me to Dr. Jewett and to immunotherapy. Because the cannabis, although Sophie became one of the more well-known children around the world for using this plant so successfully in so many different ways, it was not stopping her tumor. So that's when Dr. Jewett agreed to put Sophie's live brain tissue into mice that I could then fly to Israel for cannabinoid sensitivity testing, with one caveat: she wanted to study my daughter's immune system. And when she took my daughter's blood, the phone rang when she got the results and she said, I don't know how to explain this to you. And I braced myself because at this point, all the news that we'd gotten was just bad news after bad news. She told me, your daughter has an immune system of a healthy adult, but she's a child. Her immune system should be immature. She's on she's on 4 chemotherapies. Her immune system should be knocked down and her natural killer cells should be malfunctioned because she has a brain tumor. It wasn't until a cyst formed in the recession pocket where they scooped out the disease that we were able to get fluid off of Sophie's brain and give it to Dr. Jewett. And that's when she discovered she had 0 natural killer cells in her brain. From the neck down, they were that of a healthy adult, but in the brain, 0. All the other cells were functioning brilliantly, but something was happening with those primary natural killer cells. When they were crossing the blood-brain barrier, they were not surviving the tumor microenvironment. So there was something going on that cannabis was never going to fix. That led us to studying 27 patients using cannabinoids through my company CannaKids. We then reversed engineered that science into humanized mice. We published on it and we proved, it was accepted to publication to a top cancer journal, and we proved that a synthetic cannabinoid that we were using that mirrors much of how THC works in the human body was not only rebooting the natural killer cells and returning them to a healthy state, which then was helping the patient target and kill their cancer, but it was also targeting the stem cells. That is when Dr. Jewett and I's world collided, and that is when we decided to create NKore BioTherapeutics, because we were both on the same mission and just were using different processes in which to help people.
Yeah, very cool. And I'm a big believer in the power of NK cells to fight cancer and harnessing those, especially in an allogeneic, a context. And so how are you spoke on this a little bit, but how are you supercharging those NK cells? How are you harnessing them?
So we first start with a super donor, of course, and we take their whole blood. We really look for people whose NK cells are at the peak of performance. And that's where the conversation is going to get a little bit interesting here in a few minutes.
Yeah.
Once we have taken those allogeneic natural killer cells, we feed osteoclasts from another super donor to those natural killer cells, along with 9 different strains of probiotic bacteria. It's a very complex process using a lot of different reagents and processes. But throughout the next 4 to 5 weeks, the NK cells end up consuming all of this bacteria and all the osteoclasts, and it adopts the aggressive behavior of the osteoclasts. And then the probiotic acts as this superfood that's igniting these cells and charging them. Yeah. And we end up with an NK cell that is more cytotoxic and is more persistent compared to what we're seeing with the other types of processes that we've studied in the field. I do believe, based on our analysis and our market research, I should say, we right now are the only company that is claiming that we have an orthogonal mechanism of action, meaning that we are seeing both immune system restoration and eradication of stem cells, which is very, very exciting.
Okay, very cool. Yeah. And so I guess, how then do you define those super donors? What characteristics of the donors qualifies them to even undergo the collection for your process?
For us, we really want to see patients who have kind of an abnormally high natural killer cell function naturally. And oddly enough, my husband is one of those people.
Yeah, very cool.
His NK cells, on average, range from 28 to 35%, when normal is 5 to 15%. I too am a super donor, which also ties he and I both back to the cannabis, which we'll explore further, I'm sure, in a few minutes. But I'm 50 and he's 51. So I'm somebody who, prior to using cannabis daily, would get sick at least a few times a year. And I'd get bronchitis more so than anything. I haven't had bronchitis in years. My husband is one of those people that never gets sick. So it was natural for us to see him being a man, because men traditionally have better NK cells than women do, but also because he just doesn't get sick. I think in our entire almost 20 years together, I can count how many times he's been ill on one hand. And prior to, I'd say, prior to COVID, it was probably half a hand that I could count him being sick on. So, it's really looking for those patients whose immune system just naturally are functioning at a very, very high level, but are also well balanced with all of the other white blood cells. They're releasing a lot of gamma interferon. They're either cytotoxic, and there's this really great harmony in between the NK cells and the other supportive cells within the lymphocytes.
Cool. This is a question that really was sparked by what you have been telling me. Is there anything that the donors can do to prepare to be donors? So if you've identified them because they have better NK cell function, is there anything they can do to prepare for that collection? That's a big question that's going around in the field, is what can the donors do to sustain their status as super donors, or to become so, or to maintain good function of their cells for these therapies?
Well, first and foremost, a healthy lifestyle is paramount. If they can be active regularly, if they can cut out sugar, because sugar very much weakens the immune system. No alcohol, no drugs. And I don't consider really cannabis a drug. It's a plant medicine that has extreme medical benefit. Put that in category over here, with drugs being over here, like the hard drugs. Cigarette smoking, absolutely should not be smoking cigarettes, and we won't even take a donor if they drink or smoke. So those are very important. Lots of sleep, de-stress, just making sure to take care of what is your temple, your body. So those are all pretty well-known things that you can do. For us, and for me, I should say, I don't represent the company as a whole in what I say about cannabis, because this isn't something that we're requiring patients to do. This is really based on my own experience with my company, CannaKids, and all the research that I did with Dr. Jewett in cannabis. I believe that everyone on the planet should be taking medical cannabis for as a preventative, as a natural killer cell booster, as an anti-anxiety. let me take that back. Not everyone on the planet, because there are some people with mental illness that this could cause a trigger. There are some people that are allergic to cannabinoids that can make it very uncomfortable for them. So I just mean people that don't have any other type of pre-existing conditions that could cause the cannabis to inflame them in any way. The only thing I've ever really seen cannabis make worse is tinnitus, but I know that there also can be triggers for people with schizophrenia and any kind of other mental illness. Those people wouldn't necessarily be considered a donor probably in the first place. But I just want to make that caveat. I shouldn't say everyone in the world. So, the cannabinoids for me is a big one. We, as I mentioned a minute ago, studied 27 different cancer patients. Some of them were cannabis naive and they'd never used the plant, and their immune system was quite broken, especially the NKs. They were malfunctioned. Some of them even had high levels of NKs, but they just weren't functioning properly. There were patients that had been on cannabis and had cancer, and their immune system was either restored or was improving as they took more and more cannabis. Then we had patients that had been out of treatment for many years, had originally been deemed terminal with zero chance of survival, and using cannabinoids survived that terminal diagnosis and were healthy and alive, and their immune system was looking beautiful.
Wow.
So looking at those patients, and again, this is published research that we have out there, I believe that cannabis is something that the field should be looking at. And as the landscape changes across the country, and as more states become legal for medical specifically, this is an approach that I'm sure not many people have ever even considered or looked at. And I do think it's one that the field should start focusing on and start really digging into. As I mentioned, I'm 50 years old and I'm beating out 20-year-olds for immune function. That would not have been the case with me prior to starting cannabis. I got sick regularly, just like everyone else does. I'm sure my immune function wasn't nearly as strong and powerful as it is now because of those factors. So looking at me and also looking at my own daughter, whose immune system we've been studying since 2018, prior to using natural killer cells, what we saw in her using cannabis was unheard of. And this is a cancer patient. So imagine if you're healthy and you're taking it. You don't need nearly as much to activate NKs when you're healthy as you do when you have cancer. There's also a probiotic bacteria that I really love that Dr. Jewett created that is for sale online through another company that licensed the technology. The gentleman who was the collaborator with Dr. Jewett, his wife had pancreatic cancer, and she ended up surviving this cancer for 5 years using the probiotic bacteria alongside her conventional chemotherapy treatments. And pancreatic is one of the most aggressive cancers there is. It was essentially a treatment they gave her. I think it was an immunotherapy that took her life, but she had very little disease in her body when this occurred. The probiotic bacteria is made by a company called NK-CLK, and that's the website, www.nk-clk.com. So I believe probiotics can be something, along with a very good, nutritious, well-balanced diet, rich with immune-boosting foods, that could be very promising. And I've recently learned one other thing that was kind of baffling to me. One of the gentleman who actually owns the facility in Cancun, Mexico, where we're currently referring patients through medical tourism, he has noticed that sourdough bread, oddly, is changing people's immune function. And he's actually asking people, that's exactly what I thought. It must be the yeast. But he said that he is seeing a clear difference in patients when they eat sourdough the day before or the morning of versus when they don't. So
cool.
I don't know, maybe there's something there.
Yeah, very, very cool. Thanks so much for joining me for this episode of The Leukopak Lady. And thanks to Tracy Ryan of NKore BioTherapeutics for sharing her story and the work that NKore is doing to advance allogeneic NK cell-based therapies. This is such important work.